Hey guys, tonight we sail back through misty centuries to explore the astonishing life of Zheng, a boy snatched from the hills of Yunnan and transformed, quite literally, into one of history's most extraordinary navigators. You'll be drifting through the dim corridors of imperial palaces, climbing aboard ships taller than some modern buildings, and gliding over moonlit waves in the company of elephants, spices, and even a giraffe or two. But first, let's set the scene where his story begins, on land, barefoot, unaware of the future that's quietly waiting in the distance. You probably won't survive this, by the way. Seriously, the moment you're taken as a war captive in 14th century China, your odds drop faster than a sailor with scurvy. But don't worry, Zheng He didn't just survive, he sailed his way into legend. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, if you're tuning in from somewhere cozy tonight, post your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're 8, maybe 9. Barefoot and running through the red clay soil of southwestern Yunnan, your laughter mixing with the call of birds in the trees. You don't know it yet, but you're living in the last days of freedom. Soldiers in iron helmets are already coming down from the hills. Their horses eat the same rice you do. Their swords shine in the morning light. The Ming army is expanding under the newly restored dynasty, and you, born Ma He into a Muslim family descended from Persian or Central Asian traders, are simply in their way. No medals, no monologues, no last-minute escapes. Just hands yanking you by the collar, tying your wrists, and tossing you into a caravan headed north. This is your childhood's end. The records don't say much about the exact moment. Historians still argue whether your family resisted or simply vanished into the chaos. What they do agree, you are taken, marched across mountains, and brought to Nanjing. There, you're absorbed into the civil service machine as a eunuch. Yeah, that happens. You're castrated before puberty. The imperial bureaucracy has very particular hiring policies, and unfortunately for you, child welfare isn't one of them. Eunuchs can't start dynasties, they say. No heirs, no threats, so you, like so many others, are reshaped to serve. You adapt quickly. You have to. By 10, you already know how to read the room, bow at the right angle, keep your face blank while important men argue over dumplings. And your name? Forget Ma He. You are now given a new name, Zheng He. Some say it's based on the region you were captured from, Zheng Lun Bao. Others think it reflects a rebirth, a washing away of the old self, like a river shedding its banks. You grow tall, unusually tall. One account says you towered over most of the court, broad-shouldered and commanding even in silence. Another tidbit, less confirmed but way more fun, it's whispered you had a booming voice and a surprisingly good sense of humor. Imagine that, a kid, once a prisoner, now cracking jokes while serving tea to emperors. Despite everything, you began to thrive in this strange new world. There's a peculiar sort of freedom in being nobody. You're overlooked just enough to observe everyone, to watch how real power flows, not just from the emperor's edicts, but from whispered favors, secret alliances, the way a tray is offered or a scroll unrolled. By your teens, you're fluent in more than one language. You've picked up bits of Persian, Arabic, even Sanskrit. Languages matter in court, especially for someone who might one day deal with traders and emissaries from foreign lands. That chance arrives sooner than expected. One day, you're summoned. No fanfare, just a nod from a superior, a glance from a nobleman. You're being reassigned. Higher up, closer to the prince's circle. Prince Ju Di, to be exact. He's not emperor yet, but he will be, and you'll be right there with him. The prince is no passive scholar. He's the kind that sharpens his own arrows. He likes men who can follow orders and bend them. You prove yourself, quietly, patiently. A detail here. A message delivered there, always with perfect timing. When a rival tries to poison the prince's falcons, yes, falcons, you're the one who spots something suspicious. Wordlessly, the prince begins to trust you. The Mongol threat still looms on the borders. The court is tense, the emperor paranoid. And through it all, you keep rising. not with loud ambition, but the kind of still, steady presence that powerful people learn to rely on without realizing it. You're still in your 20s when the first real pivot happens. The emperor dies, and the question of succession, always a fragile thing in dynasties, explodes. The prince, your patron, does not take rejection lightly. The new emperor, his nephew, tries to sideline him. Big mistake. Zhu Di rebels. Civil war. It's called the Zheng campaign. Prince against emperor, uncle against nephew. You march at Zhu Di's side not as a soldier exactly, but as a trusted envoy, a strategist, a calm voice in the storm. There's no turning back. You've picked your side, and your side wants the throne. Years later, when people speak of Zheng He, they'll picture you at sea, commanding thousands. But this moment, when you stood on the cracked tiles of a burning town, looked into your patron's eyes and nodded, it was the real beginning. And somewhere deep inside, maybe you already knew. Smoke still curls from burned-out villages as you continue the long march with Zhu Di. The Jingnan campaign is less about battlefield glory and more about the brutal crawl of siege, deception, and politics with swords. Cities surrender, fortresses resist, but inch by inch, the prince claws his way to Beijing. You don't wear a general's armor, but make no mistake, you are just as vital to this quiet, ruthless advance. At night, you sleep on the cold stone of temple courtyards or in the flickering shadow of tents. But you listen, always listening. One rumor, one courier intercepted, one misplaced supply shipment, and you whisper a warning that changes the next morning's strategy. Historians still argue whether you led men in battle or simply operated as a brilliant political agent. Some say you saved Zhu Di's life during a midnight ambush. Others claim your real genius was logistics, keeping the wheels greased and morale high. Either way, you become indispensable. Then, it happens. July 1402. Zhu Di storms Nanjing. The capital falls. The usurper emperor, the nephew, is never seen again. Suicide? Escape? Assassination? That's a debate for scholars with too much tea. What matters is this. Zhu Di becomes the Yongle emperor, and he remembers those who brought him there, especially you. There's no palace quite like a new emperor's palace. Everything smells faintly of lacquer and blood. The Yongle emperor, now seated firmly on the dragon throne, reshuffles the bureaucracy like a gambler flipping cards. Eunuchs rise, conservative ministers twitch uncomfortably. And you're promoted, fast. You don't get a parade, no golden epaulets. Instead, you're given something better, command. Specifically, you are handed a task so audacious, so bewildering, it sounds like a bedtime story told by a drunk sailor. You are to lead a fleet of ships, giant treasure ships, on a voyage beyond the known edge of the world. Your orders represent the Ming dynasty's power to foreign kings, bring back tribute, gather knowledge, and if you spot any pirates, deal with them. Let's pause and appreciate what this means. You're a eunuch from the frontier, once a prisoner of war, now head of a naval armada, stretching from horizon to horizon. You'll soon command tens of thousands of sailors. Some of your ships will carry fresh water in massive clay tanks. Others, imperial horses. Some are floating stables, some are floating temples. And some are simply, floating palaces. Here's the kicker. You're not even from a seafaring family. You didn't grow up by the coast. You learned naval command like you learned politics, by studying fast, asking the right people, and keeping your mouth shut until your timing was perfect. But you're more than a bureaucrat with a fancy title. You have presence. You're over 6 feet tall, broad and steady-eyed. Your deep voice carries over storm winds. You don't just lead, you command. When you walk the deck, people stand straighter. Even the waves seem to hesitate. And the ships, the ships. Some sources claim your treasure ships stretch over 400 feet long. That's longer than a football field. That's longer than any wooden ship the world would build for centuries. Now, modern historians still debate these measurements. Were they really that big? Were they seaworthy? Were the numbers exaggerated by admiring scribes? Who knows? But we know this. They were monsters. Multi-decked, brightly painted, carrying thousands of tons of cargo. They dwarf the Portuguese caravels of the next century. They carry not just goods, but entire ecosystems. Sailmakers, translators, doctors, navigators, even astrologers. One ship reportedly carried fresh soil to grow Chinese vegetables on the high seas. Salad, anyone? The harbor at Nanjing becomes a forest of masts. Ropes creak, banners snap, and somewhere in the chaos, you climb aboard the command vessel and take a long breath. You're not afraid. Not really. You've seen war. You've seen betrayal. The ocean? It's just a new kind of battlefield. Your orders are carved into golden tablets, wrapped in silk and sealed by the emperor himself. They give you sweeping authority. In foreign lands, your word is China's law. You are a diplomat, yes, but you also carry soldiers, archers, swordsmen, and cannon. Your presence is peaceful until it's not. Now, let's not pretend this is all smooth sailing. Behind your back, officials at court mutter. He's just a eunuch. He's too powerful. Why are we wasting money on toys for the sea? The scholar class doesn't like you. You skipped all the Confucian exams. You wear boots, not slippers. But none of that matters once you leave port. The first voyage is scheduled for 1405, 7 years after the Yongle Emperor took power. 7 years of reconstruction, shipbuilding, intrigue, and preparation. You've watched your fleet grow from sketches to skeletons to fully rigged leviathans, and now it's time to test them. You stand at the helm. The harbor is packed with people. Women wave handkerchiefs. Children shout names. Somewhere, someone is definitely selling overpriced squid skewers. The wind shifts. The drums roll. And slowly, very slowly, your fleet begins to move. Can you imagine the sound? 100 ships sliding into formation, sails snapping, oars dipping, banners catching the sun like dragon scales. This isn't just a voyage, it's a performance, a declaration, a floating empire. As you move down the Yangtze River toward the sea, the land thins and the salt tang sharpens. You pass rice paddies and bamboo groves, temples and taverns. Some people bow, others just stare, open-mouthed. You are leading China to the sea, not as conqueror, but as envoy. But make no mistake, your fleet carries muscle. Crossbows, repeating arrows, artillery, in one hold, a barrel of sulfur, labeled only for real emergencies. That's definitely comforting. You don't know exactly what you'll find out there. Storms, pirates, suspicious sultans, maybe even sea monsters if the older sailors are to be believed. But your course is set. Next stop, India. Salt air clings to your robe as the fleet rolls over swells deeper than your hometown valley. It's your first real taste of the open ocean, not the gentle lapping of rivers or sheltered bays, but the full, rolling, unpredictable blue. You stand firm, feet wide on the deck, scanning the horizon. Somewhere out there lies the Malabar coast. Spices, rubies, rhinos, the works. But first, survival. You quickly discover that even the largest ships groan when waves slap them sideways. Your sailors are a patchwork quilt of humanity, hardened soldiers, bean curd vendors turned cooks, boys pretending not to vomit. Some pray to the sea goddess Mazu, others just keep chewing ginger root and hoping for land. Each day begins with incense and drums. Navigators check the stars, feeling their way across the sky like blind men in a library. You pass islands shaped like turtles, and cliffs that jut from the sea like broken dragon teeth. Fishermen wave, some flee. One group throws pineapples at you, though you suspect it's more about panic than aggression. Despite the size of your armada, this isn't a military march, it's theater. You sail in columns, each vessel a floating ambassador of Ming sophistication. You're not just delivering silk and lacquerware, you're selling an idea. China is strong, civilized, and has absolutely no chill when it comes to showing off. You arrive in Calicut, India, like a parade that forgot to end. The harbor already bustling with Arab dhows, Indian merchant vessels, and Portuguese speculators. Yes, they're poking around already. Goes eerily silent. Then a ripple of reaction. Shouts, drums, the wild smell of curry and ocean. Spices, sweat, incense. It hits you all at once. Calicut's king, smart, wary, and drenched in gold, welcomes you with wary arms. He's seen traders before, but nothing like this. You offer gifts, porcelain vases, silk embroidered with phoenixes, bolts of brocade that shimmer like wet koi. In return, elephants, sapphires, peacocks, and paperwork. Oh yes, there are treaties, scrolls, ink-stained interpreters whispering translations while wiping their brows. You're a military commander, yes, but this trip is about diplomacy too. You drink cinnamon tea while discussing tariffs. You nod solemnly as priests chant invocations. You try to look unfazed when someone offers you fried scorpion on a banana leaf. Historians still argue whether this first voyage was meant as genuine cultural exchange or veiled intimidation. You bring goodwill, yes, but you also park a war fleet outside someone's kingdom. That's like showing up to a dinner party with a tank and saying, don't mind this, just here for the hors d'oeuvres. And you're not just handing out gifts, you're collecting tribute. Sometimes it's gold, sometimes it's rare birds or teeth from a sacred cow. Sometimes it's promises to align with China, to trade fairly, not to attack neighboring islands you definitely plan to visit next. It's diplomacy wrapped in ritual, but backed by very real muscle. Then comes the fringe detail that still gets whispered centuries later: the giraffe. Not yet, but close. On your way back from Calicut, your fleet swings through smaller kingdoms and principalities, some eager to cooperate, others eyeing your sails like wolves at a banquet. You establish relations with rulers in the Maldives, Sri Lanka, and the African coast. In some places you're greeted with songs, in others, arrows. One night near a reef-choked harbor, a minor warlord refuses to meet you. Instead, he sends an insult, a broken spear, and a note calling your emperor a lotus-sniffing windbag. Mistake. You deploy just 2 ships. That's all it takes. Within hours, the warlord's fortress is reduced to smoking rubble, and your marines are politely restacking his tribute chests on your decks. You send him home with the message rewritten, this time on silk, with an apology woven into the hem. See diplomacy, Zheng style. You also collect maps. Not just any maps, we're talking star charts, tide calendars, and rumors drawn in ink. Local pilots tell stories of islands made of copper, of cannibal beaches, of a river where fish climb trees. You don't believe all of it, but you record all of it. And remember the scholarly jealousy back home? It only gets worse. News of your successes spreads fast. By the time you return to Nanjing, dragging hulls filled with riches and minds filled with stories, you're a legend, but also a threat. You, a eunuch, are being toasted in kingdoms where Confucian ministers couldn't locate north with a compass. You've been kissed by queens, bowed to by pirates, and offered an actual ruby the size of a soup spoon. One courtier mutters that you're too worldly. Another says you've lost your virtue to the ocean, whatever that means. Still, the The emperor beams. The young emperor is delighted. He sees in you not just a servant, but an extension of his will. He wants more, further, wilder, bolder. And so the second voyage begins almost immediately. This time, your ships hug the Indian Ocean's edge longer. You explore ports like Hormuz, Mecca-adjacent trading hubs, and East Africa's Swahili coast. And that, dear listener, is where the giraffe finally makes its entrance. In the kingdom of Malindi, you are presented with a qilin, a mythical beast in Chinese lore said to signal the presence of a just and wise ruler. Except this one has long legs, a spotted hide, and lashes that could win a modeling contract. It's a giraffe. Your sailors stare. The creature stares back. You feed it lotus leaves and mulberries, and try not to laugh at how ridiculous it looks on a wooden deck with salt spray in its hair. Bringing it back to China is an ordeal. Ropes, platforms, bribes for startled harbor masters, but you do it. When the giraffe bows its neck before the emperor, the court loses it. Poets scramble for metaphors. Artists paint it like it's part dragon. Scholars debate whether it walked straight out of heaven. Historians still argue whether this voyage was more about collecting tribute or proving a point. You sail not to conquer, but to awe. You return again with riches, yes, but more importantly, with stories. Tales of cultures and creatures so different they rattle the court's sense of superiority. But you don't gloat, you bow, you report, and then, when the orders come once more, prepare for another voyage, you smile. Because you know this isn't the end. It's barely the beginning.
The sails crack like whips overhead as your third voyage slices through the monsoon wind. The crew has grown leaner, tighter. Gone are the wide-eyed rookies of the first expedition. These sailors wear sunburn like armor and treat storms like awkward dinner guests. You move among them quietly, your presence felt more than heard. This time your fleet's not just big, it's strategic. You've upgraded logistics, added better cartographers, traded out a few ceremonial flutists for seasoned Marines. Let's be honest, sometimes diplomacy requires a gentle drumbeat, and other times, a catapult aimed politely offshore. The third voyage pulls you deeper into the Indian Ocean, like a bead sliding down a string. You revisit known ports, Calicut, Hormuz, Sri Lanka, but now you arrive like an old friend with newer, shinier gifts. Silk gets an upgrade. Your lacquerware bowls gleam darker, almost obsidian. You're playing the long game. Each gift a handshake, each handshake a future port of call. Sri Lanka again. A lush green dagger in the ocean and far from peaceful. Remember the warlord who insulted you last time? Well, his replacement's worse. Kin Alakeshvara of Prakoti is what you get if ambition and paranoia had a baby. He greets you with smiles, but his eyes never stop calculating. You sense it immediately. This is not a welcoming committee. It's a trap with gold trim. He delays your audience, sends decoys to negotiate, circles your encampment with troops. Finally, a bribe lands in your lap, a dozen ornate fans, and a whisper to leave quickly. You don't. Instead, under moonlight, you launch a precision strike. Marines slip through palm groves like ghosts. By dawn, Alakeshvara is shackled aboard your flagship, his throne stuffed awkwardly in a crate beside him. It's not about humiliation. It's about message control. You will not be toyed with. This moment becomes legendary. You don't just subdue a hostile kingdom, you transport its monarch halfway across the ocean and present him to the Ming court. The optics? Chef's kiss. One moment he's plotting behind palace curtains, the next he's prostrating before the Son of Heaven in Nanjing, swearing loyalty in a language he barely speaks. Historians still argue whether this bold capture was independently decided or quietly greenlit by the emperor. Either way, it cements your reputation. Not just a sailor, not just a diplomat, you are now a mover of kings. The young Lei Emperor naturally is thrilled. He throws a banquet so lavish that a goat falls asleep in its own garland. Courtiers are baffled. This eunuch is building an empire without bullets. But not everyone is clapping. Backroom scholars grumble. Confucian conservatives grow pale. They hate this entire project. Exploration, tribute, exotic giraffes, none of it fits their inward-looking, modest vision of China. They mutter about budget waste, spiritual pollution, bad feng shui. One famously declares, "The sea is no place for proper men." You return to sea anyway. Onward to the Persian Gulf, through straits so narrow you can smell goat curry from shore. At Hormuz, you dock beside ships shaped like upturned spoons and towered like castles. The port is an architectural fever dream. Pearls, perfumes, chainmail, cats lounging on copper plates. Local merchants eye you with suspicion until you offer them a jade screen that depicts all 4 seasons on both sides. Trade opens. You receive bags of myrrh and a monkey trained to drink tea. The monkey's terrible at it, but adorable. Somewhere along this voyage, you begin noticing something odd. Your crew starts writing poetry. Not just sailors trying to impress cooks, but full verses about starlight on sails and dolphins keeping pace with your rudders. It's as if the vastness of the ocean breaks something open inside them. You wonder if this happens to every seafarer. If staring at infinity makes a person smaller, softer, maybe a little weirder. Your physicians, meanwhile, experiment with tropical remedies. One concocts an early sunscreen using jasmine oil and crushed oyster shells. Another insists that chewing dried mango rinds wards off sea demons. You let them try. Why not? You also hear strange gossip from the Yemeni coast. Rumors of massive sea beasts with eyes like lanterns and spines that glow green at night. A sailor swears he saw one under a full moon. Another claims he married one, but you chalk that up to fermented fig wine. Your journals grow thicker. You begin sketching coastlines by hand. Each curve and inlet becomes part of a mental map that only you can see. You're not just following orders now. You need to know what's next. What's beyond the next coral reef, beyond the next whisper of land. And, somewhere in your gut, a deeper realization starts forming. This is not just about tribute, not even about China. This is about curiosity so large that it can't fit inside palace walls. Still, back home, the tides are shifting. The young Lei Emperor grows restless. His eyes turn north toward Mongol borders, toward brick and blood. He starts talking about walls. Not metaphorical ones, but actual stone barriers. Some ministers quietly petition to divert funds away from your fleet. And yet, you are told to prepare another voyage. But this time, there's a hesitation in the order. A pause. You ignore it. You climb back aboard your flagship, the Baoshun, which now feels more like a limb than a vessel. You run your fingers along the hull, whisper thanks to the sails, nod at the gull that's been following your crew since Calicut. It's probably cursed, but you've grown fond of it. You hoist anchor, and you sail west again. Not because you're commanded, but because this is where you belong.
The clouds over Beijing are thick with soot and suspicion. You return from your triumphant voyage expecting cheers and incense, but instead you get narrowed eyes, whispered side glances, and a palace that seems colder somehow. The young Lei Emperor has changed. You notice it instantly. His robes are heavier, his gaze less playful. You kneel before him, not as a subject, but as a man who knows too much of the sea to fear thunder in a hallway. He nods once, no embrace, no banquet, just a nod, as if to say, "You've done well, but we're at war now." Because yes, war is coming. Civil war. Zuki V, the man you once protected through corridors of fire and coup, has begun purging dissent. Bureaucrats are disappearing. Confucian officials, those ever-frowning critics of your voyages, are being replaced by men with sharper eyebrows and looser ethics. You've always served the emperor, but now you wonder, which version of him are you serving today? You don't ask. You bow again. Then you're handed a scroll, sealed with vermilion wax. It's your new command, not just another voyage. You are to lead the largest maritime expedition in human history. You blink, swallow. Even you hadn't expected this. Over the next month, your shipyards in Nanjing become a forest of masts and scaffolding. The smell of pitch and sawdust sticks to everything. You oversee the construction of over 300 vessels, massive 9-masted baochuan, sleek horse transports, floating hospitals, and supply junk so wide you could host a small concert on the deck. The numbers boggle modern historians. Some argued the largest ship stretched 120 meters long, larger than a football field. Others claimed these dimensions were exaggerated by awestruck scribes. Historians still argue whether the flagship could actually carry 500 men or whether that was just propaganda carved in teak. You don't care. You're there. You watch each hull rise like the ribs of some sleeping dragon. You walk the docks barefoot at dawn just to feel the scale under your soles. The morning fog curls around the masts like incense around a deity's fingers. This is no ordinary fleet. This is China's floating resume. The crew, a circus of specialists, astronomers, linguists, diplomats, marines, herbalists, artists, priests of every persuasion, and, of course, cooks. You insist on at least 5 cooks per ship. Why? Because nothing turns a diplomatic meeting sour faster than bad dumplings. You assemble translators who can speak Persian, Tamil, Arabic, Swahili. One claims to know mermaid dialect, but mostly uses it to flirt with dockhands. Your personal cabin is built like a scroll unrolling, elegant, sparse, and mobile. A shrine to Guanyin sits near the stern, its tiny bronze face worn smooth by your fingers. You light incense each morning, not because you're devout, but because you need something to whisper to when the wind won't listen. Then, the day arrives. You stand at the helm. 1,000 red banners snap in the wind. The drums beat once, twice, and the fleet moves. From Nanjing to the Yangtze's mouth, you are a floating city. Villagers run barefoot to see you pass. Chickens panic. Monks drop prayer beads mid-chant. The sight of your ship sparks rumors as far as Samarkand. China is building a water empire. You stop in Champa first. They're used to you now. The local king greets you with lemongrass tea and an awkward dance involving fish puppets. You pretend to enjoy it. Diplomacy requires a flexible face. Next comes Java, then Sumatra. There you broker peace between 2 rival sultans using little more than embroidered silks and a game of mahjong. It works. You're not sure why, but sometimes the point isn't a game. It's who sets up the table. From there, you cross the Bay of Bengal. You begin noticing a rhythm to these voyages. Wake up to bird cries, eat rice and pickled radish, pray, inspect sails, visit officials, exchange gifts, sail again. And every few nights, something bizarre. A storm full of red lightning, a monk who dreams the next port's weather with eerie accuracy, a fish with gold scales that refuses to die. You write it all down in your private journal, not because anyone will read it, but because one day you want someone to remember. At Calicut, your old friend the Zamarin is waiting. He greets you not with formality, but with a grin and a mango sticky rice dish that tastes like friendship and spice. You spend a week here. Trade porcelain for pepper, lapis for pearls, silk fans for coral jewelry. You bring out your most unusual cargo, a mechanical puppet theater. It tells the story of the Monkey King with levers and light. The Indian nobles are entranced. One weeps openly. You decide to leave the contraption behind. It will serve better here, bringing laughter under monsoon skies. But this voyage is more than just trading trinkets. You're also bringing envoys home. From the Persian Gulf, from Bengal, from far-off Malacca, they travel in your fleet now, dressed in embroidered robes gifted by the Ming court. They walk your decks at night talking of empire, of poetry, of gods with many arms. And yet, something grows uneasy. The winds are less predictable. One of your astrologers predicts a celestial shift, an omen of great change in wooden dragons sleeping,
whatever that means. You nod politely. At night, your dreams become strange. You see your ships sailing without you. You see a giraffe weeping at the edge of a burning forest. You see the palace in Nanjing swallowed by vines. You wake sweaty, whispering for water. Then, you sail on, because that's what you do. You are Zheng Ha, and this ocean is not done with you yet.
The sun breaks over the Indian Ocean like a burning coin, and your fleet turns eastward, sails taut with ambition and the scent of faraway spice. You've completed multiple successful voyages now, but this next chapter, it's something more. This is the one where the sheer absurdity of it all, the scale, the splendor, the sheer bureaucratic madness truly hits its stride. You are, once again, sailing as admiral of the Ming dynasty's most outrageous flex, the treasure fleet. Back in Nanjing, the imperial treasury creaks under the weight of silver ingots and silk rolls earmarked for your journey. And oh, the inventory. Scrolls and scrolls of it. You've got lacquerware, jade dragons, celestial charts, carved rhino horns, medicinal ginseng packed like treasure, and even cloisonné chamber pots. Because if you're going to impress foreign kings, might as well start in the bathroom. But the real marvel isn't what's inside your ships. It's the ships themselves. Giant, ribbed monsters of teak and fur stitched together with waterproof paste and iron nails forged with prayers. The largest, your personal flagship, is said to be 9-masted and more than 400 feet long. Now, scholars today raise their eyebrows at this. Many argue these figures are exaggerated. Could a wooden ship that size even float without snapping in half like a soggy fortune cookie? Historians still argue whether the treasure ships were truly that massive, or whether the measurements were symbolic, meant to awe more than inform. But to you, they are real. You've walked their decks. You've watched them roll over waves like floating palaces, and when your fleet moves, it moves like a single beast, with hundreds of eyes and the loudest belly on Earth. This 6th voyage is your grandest yet. You sail past the Maldives, those sugar-sized islands where fishermen wave lazily from coral boats, then down the coast of Africa again, your hulls packed with silks and letters from the Yongle Emperor. You visit Mogadishu, yes, that Mogadishu, centuries before pirates would define it in the modern mind. The Sultan welcomes you with cautious curiosity. You offer him silks and sweet pastries laced with osmanthus, and he gifts you back a pair of African lions. They do not enjoy sea travel. Neither does the fleet's dog. The lions are eventually tethered to your deck with gold-plated chains. You try to avoid them. They keep growling at the giraffe from last time, who has now developed what looks like clinical anxiety. You have an herbalist working on it. But it's not all exotic diplomacy and startled wildlife. You're also sending strong messages. Your presence in these distant ports says something that letters can't. China is here. China is vast, and China remembers who sent tribute and who didn't. At one port, unnamed in your logs, though speculation leans towards Sumatra, you face a petty king who refuses to recognize Ming's superiority. So, you send a message. No, not a letter, a battalion. Your Marines storm the beach, and within hours, the local ruler is aboard your ship, trembling in cuffs, reciting your emperor's name like a spell to keep the sharks away. This isn't cruelty, it's diplomacy, Ming style, equal parts Confucius and cannonball. Still, there's tension growing back home. Word from the capital trickles in via runners and pigeons. The emperor's health is failing. Ministers bicker, Confucian scholars continue grumbling about the cost of your expeditions. Should China really be sending fleets to hand out teapots and bring back giraffes when the Yellow River keeps flooding and the Mongols are still annoying? But you ignore the static. You have ports to visit, tribute to collect, charts to update. At Hormuz, you trade for Persian horses, sleek, nervous beasts with eyes that look like they've seen the end of empires. In Bengal, you encounter an envoy from Mecca who invites you to attend the Hajj. You respectfully decline. Duty comes first. Still, you feel the pull of your faith like a tide under the keel. You are Muslim, yes, though not loudly. You fast quietly, you pray when the stars align, you carry verses stitched into your pillow. In every port, people crowd to see you. Children gape at your armor. Poets try to describe your fleet, but keep stumbling over metaphors. You begin to realize you're not just visiting these places, you're becoming legend. Sailors whisper your name in 4 languages. Traders compose rhymes about your banners. A woman in Malabar asks you if you're descended from dragons. You smile and say, "Not directly, but they did write me a letter once." Of course, it's not all pageantry. Storms hit hard. Once off the coast of Ceylon, your fleet is caught in a monsoon that seems designed by a particularly bitter sea god. Rain hammers the decks, waves taller than city gates toss your ships like toys in a bathtub. The giraffe throws up. One of your translators insists this is an omen that something will be swallowed. No one is comforted. But your ships hold. Your crew sings through the chaos. Ancient sailors' songs with verses about fish who curse and stars that lie. And when the sun finally returns, the decks steam like soup bowls. You kneel in prayer, not because you're afraid, but because survival tastes better with gratitude. Back in Calicut, you finally receive the gift you've been promised for months. A massive stone stele inscribed with your name, your deeds, and the giraffe. Yes, again, it's the size of a wagon and takes 8 men to move. You don't know where you'll put it yet. Maybe in the palace courtyard. Maybe just somewhere people can trip over it and remember you were here. But this voyage is the high point. You can feel it. The crew is seasoned, the world knows your name. The Emperor still breathes, barely. But time is tugging at your robe. You feel it in your knees, in the slow way your bones creak when you stand. Still, you are Zheng. The sea has not yet taken you, and there is one final journey ahead.
The sky hangs heavy with the scent of cardamom and salt as your fleet edges once again toward the Malabar coast. You've done this before. Sailed these waters, shaken these hands, tasted these spices. But this 7th voyage, it carries a different weight. There's a hush aboard the ships, a breath being held. Maybe it's the rumors. Maybe it's your joints. You're older now, wiser, certainly, but also a little more mortal. Still, there's work to be done. You dock first at Calicut, your old stomping ground, where traders now greet you with smiles that say, "Welcome back, you improbable legend. This place remembers you." The harbor smells like cinnamon, seaweed, and last night's fish stew. The Sultan greets you with a ceremonial elephant, of course. You're not even surprised anymore. You simply bow, offer him embroidered silks, and hand over yet another beautifully penned letter from the Yongle Emperor. Only, it's not his letter. Not anymore. The Emperor is dead. Ju Di, your patron, the man who gave you everything, your rank, your ships, your dream, is gone. Word reached you weeks ago, via a scroll sealed in red lacquer and trembling hands. The fleet paused for a day of mourning on sea. The drums were silent, the lions were restless. Even the crew, normally too hardened for sentiment, offered whispered prayers into their bowls of rice. Historians still argue whether Judy's death marks the true end of your era. Some claim everything that comes after is just political inertia, a legacy ship still coasting on old wind. Others say your next actions prove your vision was bigger than any one man. You keep going. In Ceylon, the temples still shimmer with gold and incense. A monk recognizes you from a dream, says you were once a lion in a past life, that you roared the name of Buddha across oceans. You chuckle and give him a jar of pickled bamboo shoots. He gives you a tooth from a sacred elephant. Not exactly an even trade, but symbolism, as always, carries weight. Your logbooks begin to swell with strange entries.
spoke with pearl diver who swore he saw a ship of ghosts, gifted 2 crates of parrots who know how to curse in Tamil. Translator claims the giraffe now responds to music. Some of your crew are starting to believe in omens. You left them. Superstition is better than mutiny. You head deeper into the Arabian Sea, past Hormuz again, where spices change hands with gold and midnight auctions. Then to Aden, that sun-baked city where sails go to retire. And then you do something wild. You sail to Mecca. Well, not quite all the way, but close enough. To Jeddah. Close enough to see the outlines of pilgrims on the road, to hear stories from those who've walked the holy path. You stand on deck one twilight evening, watching the crescent moon rise over the Red Sea, and feel something shift inside you. You're a Muslim, yes, you've always been. But this nearness, the desert air, the whispered prayers, it feels like coming home to a place you've never lived. Your officers, mostly Confucians, don't get it. They're more interested in the wind patterns and water barrels. But you pause. You pray a little longer that night. You think about your father, taken by the Ming army all those decades ago. You wonder what he'd think of you now. His son, a eunuch, a general, a ghost in 4 languages. In Africa, you visit Malindi again. The giraffe delegation unfortunately has been retired, but the king remembers you. He gifts you a necklace made from coral shaped like stars. You wonder if it's real, or just imported from Guangzhou and sold back to you. Either way, you thank him. There's tension growing within the fleet. Some ships fall behind. Food goes bad. One massive treasure ship springs a leak and has to be abandoned. The lions grow listless. You lose one of your best navigators to fever. He dies whispering something about a silver mountain under the sea. Your men toss his body into the waves, wrapped in a red silk banner. And still, you press on. You stop in Mombasa, where children draw pictures of your ships in the sand using twigs and fingers. One girl offers you a coconut carved with your name. You give her a kiss on the forehead and promise to remember her. You visit a port, undocumented, unnamed, where the stars seem different. The locals wear robes stitched with metal and ask you if your ships have wings. You say no, not yet. By now, the sea is less an obstacle and more a pulse beneath you. You know her moods, when she's joking, when she's planning something cruel. You start to dream of waves that speak, of sharks who remember your name. One night, just off the coast of India, a storm rolls in. It's massive, black as spilled ink. You ride it out on the main deck, soaking, roaring commands through the wind. Your crew believes you're fearless. They don't see your hands shaking behind your sleeves. The next morning, wreckage floats beside your flagship. Not one of yours. A local merchant ship shattered by the same storm. Bodies in the water. You pause. You pray. You order the survivors hauled aboard. One of them gives you a ring carved from bone. You don't ask whose. This voyage is your longest. Your bones ache. You sleep less. You think more. You write poetry in the margins of your navigational charts. You begin referring to your ship as she, and your officers don't correct you. You are nearing the end, but not yet. You sail once more toward home, the holds heavy with gifts and grief. Your logs are a symphony of scribbles, half diplomat, half mystic. You are Zheng Ha, Admiral of the Seas, and though your emperor is gone, your story is not yet finished.
You hear it before you see it. Hooves clacking awkwardly on wooden planks, startled sailors yelling, and someone screaming, "It's taller than 2 men!" You're mid-breakfast when the commotion reaches your ears. A page bursts into your cabin, red-faced and panting. "Admiral," he stammers, "you might want to see this." You step outside and immediately blink against the sunlight. There, tethered unceremoniously to the mainmast of one of your treasure ships, is a creature that looks like it stepped straight out of a child's dream, towering, spotted, long-necked, and unmistakably confused. A giraffe. A real one, not a carving or a tapestry, but an actual living, breathing giraffe. It's swaying gently with the ship's motion, chewing on a small branch, its giant eyes looking over the deck with something between terror and smug disinterest. The animal had been a gift, of course, from the Sultan of Bengal, who'd received it from a delegation out of Malindi, who had possibly acquired it through some obscure and overly ambitious trade route. No matter how it got here, it's yours now, and now it has to go to China. The sailors are beside themselves. They call it the Qilin, a mythical beast of peace and prosperity. Someone suggests painting its hooves gold. You veto that immediately. Someone else offers to knit it a silk robe. Also, no. You order a specialized pen built on the main deck. You assign a team of keepers, and you, perhaps against your better judgment, personally request it be treated with the same care as a high-ranking envoy, because this giraffe isn't just a curiosity, it's a message, a living postcard from the edge of the known world. This was your 8th voyage. By now, the treasure fleet has become more than a marvel. It's a floating metaphor. China sailing out into the world with open hands and vast sails, giving and receiving in equal measure. Or, so the story goes. Historians still argue whether this giraffe was truly the first to reach China. Some believe earlier African trade may have introduced the species centuries before. But none can deny this moment marks a high point in diplomatic theater. When you dock at Nanjing, thousands gather just to glimpse the beast. Scholars write poems about its grace. Court officials try to assign it a Confucian virtue. The emperor, now Zhu Zhangji, watches it with narrowed eyes. He's impressed, but not charmed. You sense something different in the air. Less wonder, more calculation. The court is shifting, and you, an aging eunuch with a legendary ship and a legendary beast, are beginning to feel like yesterday's headline. Still, you do your best to dazzle. You present spices, rare woods, pearls, and scrolls with golden lettering. You orchestrate dances aboard the ships. Fireworks light up the harbor. You even allow a few Confucian ministers to inspect the mechanical dragons you've had mounted on the prows of your escort vessels. They don't smile. They just nod, take notes, and whisper behind sleeves. One evening at a banquet honoring you, an official leans in and says quietly, "Wouldn't this treasure be more useful if left at home?" You raise your cup and smile. But the seed is planted. Still, this 8th voyage is no funeral march. You push further south than ever before, past Sumatra, beyond Java. In Palembang, you broker peace between rival chieftains by gifting each a bolt of brocade and an identical compass. You joke that if they ever fight again, they'll have to meet halfway. In the Maldives, you meet a woman who claims to be descended from the sea. She gives you a pearl the size of a quail's egg and a riddle you never solve. Later, you accidentally drop the pearl down a grate on your deck. You still think about it sometimes. Meanwhile, your fleet has become its own society, a city afloat. There are marriages, births, even a play performed one evening about a fisherman who dreams of a ship so large it contains the moon. You watch from the stern, cloaked in your admiral's robes, laughing quietly when the moon tips over and squashes the actors. But every triumph feels softer now. You catch yourself staring at the stars a little too long, writing your daily logs with more poetry than data. The men follow your orders, but with glances, small ones that suggest contingency plans. You're not offended, you're just tired. There's an incident in Bengal. One of your ships is detained by local authorities. Miscommunication, they say, temporary hold. You suspect political posturing. You respond by sending 5 ships and a very polite letter. The detained vessel is released within a day. You visit Sri Lanka again. The jungle feels thicker than before. Or maybe you've simply forgotten how green the world can be when it's not moving beneath your feet. A monk offers you a statue of the Buddha carved from sandalwood. You keep it by your sleeping mat. It smells like home, though you haven't known what that is in years. You begin composing a eulogy for your fleet, for yourself, for an age that seems to be slipping away. One night as the fleet floats near Malacca, a young sailor brings you tea. You ask his name. He tells you. You smile. It was your brother's name once, long ago in Yunnan, before everything changed. You tell the boy, never forget how big the world is. He nods, but you can see he doesn't quite believe you. Not yet. When you finally return to China, the giraffe steps off the ship like a celebrity. People cheer, ministers bow. The emperor gives a short speech. You kneel beside the creature, whisper something into its ear, something no one else hears, and then walk away without looking back. Later that night, in your cabin, you sit cross-legged with a brush and fresh paper. You begin your log with 7 words. There will be one more voyage.
Your sails unfurl once more, their silk bellies catching the breeze like the lungs of some slumbering dragon. The fleet groans into motion, over 100 ships, still, though fewer than in your prime. The sea is your rhythm now, and you sway with it without thinking. This is your 9th voyage. You don't say it aloud, but something tells you it may be the last. Ports that once welcomed you with processions now hesitate. Sultanates have changed hands. Trade alliances have shifted like sandbars in monsoon tides. Pirates have grown bolder and more organized. And while your fleet still dazzles with its size and ceremony, you begin to notice what isn't said anymore. That you're the arm of the emperor. That your gifts are tokens of power. That refusal means consequence. In truth, your mission feels more like nostalgia than statecraft. But you're Zheng. That still counts for something. You land at Samudera, Sumatra, where last time you helped broker peace between 2 feuding clans. Now one has mysteriously vanished. The remaining leader greets you with cautious respect, but his eyes flick to the horizon behind you. He's looking for your backup, wondering how far you'd go if challenged. You present silks and incense. He presents pearls and a son who wishes to study in Nanjing. It's polite, but hollow. Not long after, off the coast of Java, your scouts report an ambush. Pirates, again. These aren't the scruffy amateurs from your early voyages. These are professionals, armed with Malay blades, Arab muskets, and an intimate knowledge of your fleet's weak points. You don't hesitate. You order a decoy ship lit with false lanterns. The real galleons circle around, cutting silently through the dark like stalking sharks. When the pirates strike, they hit an empty hull and a row of flamethrowers. Your men erupt from the shadows with nets, spears, and the quiet fury of sailors who've done this too many times. The battle lasts less than 20 minutes. You lose 2 men. They lose everything. Later, you walk the captured pirate vessel. It's beautifully built, sleek, fast, obviously foreign. You run your fingers along the polished rails and wonder who backed this operation. Not just pirates, you suspect. Someone with a grudge. Maybe someone in court. Historians still argue whether this ambush was state-sponsored sabotage or just an act of opportunism. Some say Ming ministers wanted to weaken your legacy. Others claim it was simple greed. You'll never know, but the memory stays sharp. You dock at Hormuz again, the strait glittering with merchant ships like coins in a wishing well. The city is larger now. Persians, Arabs, Indians, even Portuguese voices echo from the markets. You're offered cinnamon wrapped in scrolls, parrots that curse in 6 languages, and a melon said to cure heartbreak. You buy 2. Your presence still carries weight, but diplomacy has grown thornier. Every favor is transactional, every gift a negotiation. You smile through it, sipping spiced wine and pretending not to notice when officials forget your title. You remind them gently. They remember. Back at sea, your fleet weathers 3 storms in 6 weeks. One gale is so strong it tears the flag from your command ship. You refuse to replace it until you arrive safely at your next port. Superstition, some say. You call it respect for the ocean, which never forgets who dares to tame it. In Calicut, you are welcomed by a younger generation of rulers, some of whom remember you, most of whom know only your name. One points at your treasure ships from the palace window and says, "We thought those were a myth." You chuckle, then ask where the old sultan is. The prince just shrugs. You realize something painful in that moment. The people you once called friends, rivals, allies, they're gone. Time has eaten them, and now you're meeting their children. Still, you perform your duties. You oversee exchanges of tribute, you authorize trade deals, you commission repairs for a leaking hull, you hold a small funeral at sea for a sailor who succumbed to fever. His name was Chen. He carved birds into the mast railings. No one else remembers that, but you. In the Maldives, you are approached by a group of Arab merchants who claim to have information. You meet them quietly in a beached boathouse lit only by oil lamps. They speak of growing tensions between Ming China and the rising Portuguese fleet in the Indian Ocean, of explorers with crosses instead of sails, of powder keg diplomacy and Jesuit ambition. They warn you, the sea is about to change. You nod, not surprised, just wearied. Later, while watching your fleet from a cliff, you wonder aloud, what happens when the waves remember other names? A junior officer, too young to be cynical, asks what you mean. You just pat his shoulder and tell him to enjoy the mangoes here. They taste like stars. Back on the water, the journey feels heavier. Your ships creak more loudly. The flags don't flap quite as proudly. You get winded climbing the rigging. The stars above remain unchanged, but they seem more distant somehow. Your quarters are quieter now. You reread old letters. You sketch ships that don't exist. You trace the scar on your chest from that injury near Ceylon years ago and wonder why you never wrote about it in the logs. Then one night, in the Gulf of Aden, you hold a quiet feast for the crew. No guests, no show, just your sailors, their bowls of rice, and a sky so clear it could shatter. You raise your cup and say simply, "Thank you." No grand speech, no orders, just that. And for a while, the fleet feels like it once did, invincible, infinite, immortal. But deep down, you know. This voyage is bending towards something final.
You drop anchor near the southern coast of Ceylon, Sri Lanka as it may one day be called, where thick jungles press against golden beaches and temples rise like forgotten teeth from the forest floor. The humidity hits like a warm towel to the face. The air smells of cinnamon bark, ocean salt, and something older, more mysterious, like incense from a ritual no one remembers performing. You've been here before, of course, but something about this visit feels different, quieter, more like a pilgrimage than a mission. Your entourage climbs the worn stone steps of a massive temple complex. Monkeys chatter from the rafters. A cow watches you pass without blinking. Inside, the statues seem to breathe in the heavy air. Buddhas and Hindu deities, side by side, carved with impossible grace. Some of these relics are thousands of years old. Others have crumbled to anonymity, their names long since erased by vines and rain. You light a stick of incense at the altar, not for show, but because you need to. Even you, Admiral Zheng He, sometimes need something to believe in. You whisper a small prayer, not to any one god, but to the sea itself. that it be kind, that it remember your name. The monks here remember you too. You're not a stranger in these hills. They greet you with clasped hands and mild amusement. You've aged since your last visit, and they don't hide their surprise. One of them even jokes, "Your eyebrows have learned to sail down your face." You laugh. They offer you tea so bitter it wakes a part of your soul you thought had retired. Then they share stories. One monk, eyes milky with age, tells you of a dragon that lives in a mountain cave nearby. Another speaks of a shrine that grants dreams to travelers who sleep beneath its roof. And another, his voice soft as silk, says that a god once walked this island disguised as a man. He planted a tree that still grows, though no one dares pick its fruit. You nod, absorbing it all. Not to judge, just to remember. Historians still argue whether Zheng He's encounters in Ceylon were purely diplomatic or dipped into the supernatural. Some claim he forged alliances with local rulers. Others believe he witnessed, or believed he witnessed, something beyond reason. You're not here to clarify. You're here to listen. Later, you visit the ruins of an ancient city swallowed by jungle. Trees split stone. Roots curl through archways like fingers claiming a prize. Your guide, a teenager who wears a rusted coin around his neck, tells you no one knows who built this place. The locals call it the Silent Court. Legend says it was a palace for gods who got bored of being worshipped. You linger there longer than expected, feeling watched, but not threatened, just observed. That night, you pitch camp by a lake so still it mirrors the moon. Your men drink cautiously. A few play quiet games of dice. You wander to the water's edge and see something strange. A figure on the other side, cloaked, motionless. You raise a lantern, but they don't respond. They simply vanish like mist in wind. You say nothing to your officers. The next morning, as the fleet prepares to depart, one of your ships reports missing cargo. Not stolen, just gone. A few crates of porcelain and a sealed scroll intended as a gift to the local king. The sailors search everywhere. Nothing turns up. But oddly, in their place, someone finds a small stone idol nestled beneath the tarps. A grinning, round-bellied figure with coral eyes. You order it kept. Not out of belief, exactly, but because some exchanges don't require explanation. On your way back to the harbor, you pass a procession of villagers. They carry flowers, bowls of oil, and trays of sweet cakes. You assume it's a temple offering, but then you notice their direction. They're walking toward the beach, toward your ships. They gather at the docks, kneel in the sand, and begin to chant. You ask your interpreter what they're saying. He listens, frowns, and replies, "They're praying for your protection. They think you're cursed." "By what?" you ask. He shrugs. "By the ocean's jealousy." You're not sure how to respond, so you bow your head in thanks. As you set sail, a pod of dolphins follows your lead ship for nearly an hour, leaping through the waves like escorts. One sailor swears he saw them form the shape of a dragon before disappearing. You say nothing, but you keep that image close. Far from shore, you call a council. There's talk of shifting routes. Rumors of Portuguese ships near the tip of India have your officers uneasy. Others worry about typhoons. A few want to cut the journey short altogether. You listen patiently. Then you tell them this. We did not build ships taller than temples to hide from the weather. We do not carry maps to second-guess our direction. We sail because we are sailors. The ocean remembers those who respect it and forgets those who don't. It's not rousing exactly, but it's enough. You sail on. In the dark of night, rocking gently in your private quarters, you write a few lines in your log. Ceylon remains a mystery. I suspect it always will. Perhaps the sea, too, is a kind of God, one who listens, one who tests, and one who sometimes returns what it has taken just to see what you'll do with it. You seal the page with wax and fall asleep to the sound of waves tapping the hull like an old friend.
Back on the open seas, you glide toward the Malabar coast again, sails full and eyes forward. But the wind in your ears carries more than salt and storm. It carries rumors. Word travels faster than a fleet. And even as you chart courses and monitor supplies, you begin to hear the whispers. At first, it's just idle murmurings from the crew. Palace intrigue, passed through gossip like cups of rice wine. Minister Hu thinks the voyages waste imperial money. There are talks of reassignments. Some say the emperor is too fixated on distant lands and not enough on the mandate of heaven. You don't bite. Sailors grumble. That's as old as water. But then, in a port near Sumatra, one of your trusted envoys returns with a private dispatch. A letter hidden inside a hollowed bamboo scroll case, sealed with red wax. You read it slowly, beneath the low flicker of an oil lamp. The message is short, but heavy. Back in Beijing, a faction of Confucian scholars is gaining influence. They view your expeditions, your glorious, multi-mast, ocean-striding expeditions, as excessive, un-Confucian, even un-Chinese. Why should the Middle Kingdom seek tribute, they argue, when the world already knows its place? It stings more than you expect. You've brought peace offerings to 20 kingdoms. You've returned with rare beasts, knowledge of maps unmarked by Chinese hands, and cultural links woven into every crate. But it seems those things matter little to men who never leave their desks. And they're not entirely wrong. The treasure fleet is expensive, enormous, some say bloated. It consumes wood, silk, bronze, and men by the thousands. To many at court, these resources would be better spent defending the northern frontier, not impressing kings who send back parrots and pearls. You sigh and roll up the letter. Then you stare out your cabin window past the moonlit ocean and wonder whether you've already sailed beyond your legacy. Historians still argue whether Zheng He himself knew how precarious his position had become during these later voyages. Some claim he saw the writing on the wall. Others suggest he believed his achievements would speak for themselves. You try not to dwell. Instead, you refocus your crew. You increase discipline, tighten supply logs, and personally oversee every ceremonial exchange. If this ship is sinking politically, it won't be for lack of professionalism. One night, during a banquet hosted aboard your flagship, you drink with an ambassador from the kingdom of Ayutthaya. He's impressed with your courtesy, your knowledge of their customs, and your ability to drink fermented coconut milk without wincing. You're not what we expected, he says. We heard Chinese officials rarely smile. You give him your best grin and say, that's because the ones you've met probably don't spend months sleeping under sails. He laughs. We also heard your emperor is a god. You tilt your head. Sometimes we believe that too, especially when the taxes are due. You share a toast, and for a few hours you forget the pressures back home. But trouble doesn't sleep. A few weeks later, in the port of Champa, a small riot breaks out. Local dockworkers accuse one of your officers of disrespecting a shrine. The officer claims it was an accident, a spilled teapot, nothing more. But the damage is done. Stones are thrown, a few sailors are injured. Tensions rise fast.
You step in personally, standing atop a shipment of ivory and shouting in their language. We came in peace, and we will leave in peace, but do not mistake our calm for weakness. It works, mostly. Still, you feel the strain, the fatigue. Your physician urges you to rest more. He prescribes a root tea that tastes like burnt socks. You drink it anyway. One of your navigators, an old friend from the Yunnan days, corners you after dinner. Do you think they'll remember all this? The voyages, the maps, the gifts? You stare at the deck boards for a moment. You say, not all of it, but maybe enough. Then a wind gusts through the sails, and you both fall silent. You continue the voyage, fulfilling diplomatic duties with the precision of a man balancing on a beam. You deliver a carved jade phoenix to the king of Malacca. You accept a tribute of gold-inlaid shields from the Sultan of Brunei. You instruct your scribes to record everything, every flower, every coin, every dialect. But the ships grow quieter. Not literally. The crews still sing work songs and argue over dried squid. But there's an emotional quiet, a hush of uncertainty. Even the sea seems less chatty. The turning point arrives in Java. You receive a direct order from the imperial court: limit future voyages. No more grand tributes. No more giraffes. No more exotic missions. The letter is polite, but pointed. It ends with, your loyal service is appreciated. The Emperor's gaze must now turn inward. You read it 3 times. Then you fold it neatly and tuck it into the seam of your logbook. You say nothing to your officers. Not yet. Instead, you summon the carpenters and ask them to perform maintenance on every vessel. You order the sails inspected, the anchors reinforced, and the hulls scrubbed clean. If this is to be your twilight, you want it polished. That evening, you eat alone. No banquet, just rice, pickled radish, and dried river fish. You think of your family, what remains of them. You wonder if your name will echo in their prayers or vanish like smoke in Kemple wind. The servant knocks softly and enters, bowing low. There's a gift, he says, holding up a wrapped bundle. Inside, you find a scroll. Painted delicately in black ink is a poem from Li Bai. The sea is wide, the moonlight pale. My heart sails where no anchors nail. You smile. Then you pour yourself a cup of bitter root tea and raise it to the stars. To the ocean, you whisper. It does not answer, but it listens.
Storms don't always announce themselves with thunder. Sometimes the signs are subtle. A shift in seabird patterns, a sluggish tide, a silence in the wind that makes your skin crawl. You notice them now, out on the dark water, weeks into what will become your 6th voyage. The skies are grayer, the stars less talkative. You've sailed enough to know something's brewing. Your fleet is lighter this time, not in weight, but in mood. Gone are the bustling holds stacked with rare silks and tribute gifts. No giraffes pace the lower decks. No tiger statue sits smugly in the captain's quarters. The excitement that once accompanied these journeys has faded, replaced by a quiet duty. You're not here to impress. You're here to maintain appearances. Still, the treasure fleet cuts a magnificent figure. Even reduced, the towering red sails of your flagship could blot out a village. Sailors along the coast still gathered just to gape.
Children run along docks shouting, "Cheng He, Cheng He," as if your name is a kind of magic. But inside, you feel tired. Not just bones and joints, though those creak more than they used to, but something deeper, something soul-heavy. Then, one humid evening, the wind finally stops pretending. The horizon collapses under a sudden wall of dark clouds, and your crew scrambles. You bellow orders, lash the masts, reef the sails, double-check the anchor lines. The ship groans like it knows what's coming. When the typhoon hits, it hits like a god with bad manners. Waves rise higher than the deck rails. Rain falls sideways, slicing into your skin like needles. Lightning sketches ghostly dragons across the sky. One of the smaller vessels veers wildly and slams into a reef, its hull cracking open like a melon. You grip the helm with both hands, ignoring the sting in your fingers. Salt water stings your eyes, but you refuse to blink. The crew needs your calm, so you stare into the storm like it owes you money. Somewhere below deck, a crate topples, spilling porcelain cups and ceremonial mirrors. You wince, not for the cargo, but for what it represents, the fragility of legacy. And then you remember the tiger statue. Yes, you did bring it again, not because you believed in omens, but because old sailors are stubborn and it had become a sort of ship mascot. You even carved a tiny life jacket for it, just in case. The ship's carpenter thought you were joking. You weren't. The storm rages for 2 nights. By dawn, you've lost a ship and a dozen men, and, embarrassingly, the tiger statue, washed overboard, presumably now prowling the ocean floor terrifying eels. You mourn them all, even the tiger. The fleet regroups near the coast of Indochina. Survivors speak in hushed tones, nursing bruises and broken ribs. One man insists he saw sea spirits dancing in the waves. Another claims he heard voices calling to him from underwater. You don't argue. Everyone finds their own meaning in chaos. Historians still argue whether this typhoon was the primary reason the 6th voyage turned so cautious. Some claim it was just bad timing. Others suggest it was a final cosmic warning. Go no further. You limp on, making port in Palembang in Borneo, where you're greeted more like a bureaucrat than a legend. Diplomats bow, exchange trinkets, and quickly shuffle you back to your ship. The sparkle's gone. You're yesterday's epic. In Java, a visiting Persian trader offers you a gift, a painted astrolabe, rimmed with lapis lazuli. To guide your stars, he says. You thank him. Later, you sit alone with it under the moon and try to remember the last time you felt guided. A week later, another letter arrives. This one carries more finality than the last. The imperial court is clear. No further military support will be given. The treasure fleet is to return directly after basic diplomatic calls are made. There will be no 7th voyage, not officially, not for glory. The message isn't just budget cuts. It's a slow shuttering of your era. You gather your senior officers that night. Some are too proud to show pain. Others speak openly, bitterly. We built floating palaces, and now we're being sent home like tax collectors. One growls. You say little. You don't have to. They see it in your face. After they leave, you take out your personal log and write something short. The sea remembers, even if the court forgets. The following morning, you begin the return. There are still formalities to complete, audiences to attend, gifts to exchange, but you approach them like rituals now, not opportunities. You feel yourself slipping from history's grasp, like a scroll stored too close to a damp wall. In Sri Lanka, an elderly monk greets you with a saffron robe and a single question. Do you believe the gods sail too? You think of storms and stars and the tiger statue and smile. Only if they get bored of temples. He laughs. Then may you be their captain. You leave with a strange peace and a new robe, which your steward insists you not wear during meals because soy sauce is treacherous. The sea is calm again, almost too calm. You wonder if the ocean knows this is your last voyage, not because you want it to be, but because someone else has decided you've done enough. You want to argue, but who listens to admirals once the budget's gone? As your ships creep northward, the wind sighs through the rigging like a farewell song. And one night, while crossing the Bay of Bengal, you wake suddenly. No noise, no dream, just a feeling. You walk to the deck. Above you, the stars are bright. unbothered by human politics. Below, the ocean glows faintly, lit by bioluminescent creatures swirling in the current. It feels like the ocean is breathing. You close your eyes. You whisper something that only the sea can hear. And then you return to bed, unsure if you wake up in China or in legend. The sails rise again. Not with triumph, but with memory. You're older now. The salt air bites a little harder at your lungs, and the polished wood of the deck no longer gleams with fresh ambition. Still, you step aboard like you've always done, steady, centered, aware that each footfall could be your last. This isn't retirement. This is your final expedition, a return not just to the seas you've mastered, but to the man you once were. There was no grand ceremony when you received approval, no fireworks, no fanfare, just a folded letter stamped with red lacquer, informing you that His Majesty permits a 7th voyage, for ceremonial purposes, of course. You're to deliver tribute, pay respects, and reassert Ming China's presence along key ports. Simple formalities, the court calls them. But you know better. These voyages were never just about trade. They were stories in motion, tales carved across the ocean with hulls and rigging. And this will be your final verse. Your fleet is a shadow of its former self. Only a handful of ships sail with you this time. The grand treasure ships, those majestic floating cities, are mostly gone, dismantled for parts or left to rot in shallow harbors. Your new flagship is respectable, but modest, like a retired general in clean but worn robes. Still, the sailors salute you like they always have. Some are new, eyes wide and skin unscarred. Others, old companions, meet your gaze with the quiet comfort of shared history. No one has to say it aloud, but they all know Zheng doesn't return from this one. You set sail in the spring, when the monsoon winds are just beginning to stir. The sky is gentle, the sea cooperative. Even nature seems to understand the importance of this swan song. First stop, Champa, on the coast of modern-day Vietnam. The welcome is warm, if a little formal. The local king offers lacquered boxes and incense in return for porcelain and embroidered silk. You exchange pleasantries, give a polite speech, and move on. There's a rhythm to these visits now, like steps in a fading dance. Next, Java again. The port smells of cloves and smoke. You meet with a regional prince whose father you once dined with. He remembers you vaguely. The man with the floating zoo, he calls you. You chuckle. Close enough. You're slower climbing the docks now. The stairs feel steeper. One of your stewards offers a hand, but you wave him off. Pride's a stubborn thing, even with knees like cracked bamboo. At night, aboard your cabin, you pore over old charts by candlelight. The edges are smudged with time. You trace routes you once commanded with thousands of men and feel the absence of those ships like missing teeth. Historians still debate why this voyage was even allowed. Was it a reluctant favor by a weary emperor? A political maneuver by court eunuchs trying to preserve your legacy? Or did you simply ask so many times that they finally gave in just to get some peace? Whatever the reason, you're grateful. This journey isn't about politics anymore. It's about farewell. In Malacca, the air is heavy with spices and rumors. You meet a merchant who insists that in your honor, he's named his baby parrot Zheng. You politely suggest something less syllabic. Later, one of your crew swears the bird cursed at him in Arabic. You make a note. Parrots are not reliable diplomats. In Ceylon, once more, you pause at a familiar temple. You leave behind a silk banner stitched with golden cranes and the words, "Even the tide returns." You tie it to a banyan tree and stare for a long while, remembering conversations you had here decades ago. Debates with monks, the warmth of the sun on your face, and the moment you first thought, this could be the end. But it wasn't then. It might be now. You're slower rising each morning, your joints complain, your appetite thins. Sometimes your memory flickers, just for a breath, but it's enough to remind you that time is no longer your ally. You press on. In Calicut, the welcome is surprisingly grand. Trumpets blare, children toss petals, and an aging official hands you a scroll declaring you an immortal friend of the city. You try not to tear up, but later, in the quiet of your cabin, you do. It's here that the first real sign comes. Not a storm, not pirates, just a cough. A small, dry thing that sneaks up on you and refuses to leave. Then fatigue, then the occasional tremor in your fingers when you try to sign your name. Your physician says it's nothing, but his eyes say otherwise. You keep sailing. Back in the Indian Ocean, stars crowd the sky like curious onlookers. You lie on the deck some nights watching them spin and wink and think of home. Not the palace, not the court, but the house in Yunnan, now long gone, where your mother once braided your hair and whispered stories of dragons. You know you won't see it again. Near Hormuz, the fleet drops anchor for supplies. You don't leave the ship. You're too weak, too dizzy. Even standing feels like hoisting an anchor up a hill. Your officers gather around your cabin. They want to turn back. You shake your head. You've come too far for half measures. One night, the steward finds you slumped over your writing desk, quill in hand, a map beneath your cheek. You wake, eventually. Smile. Ask for warm tea and that old storybook about sea gods and moon whales. They don't understand why, but they bring it. You read the first few lines, then fall asleep again, hand resting on the ink-splotched coast of Africa. The next day, you write one more entry in your log. This is not an end. The sea does not end. The sails only furl. That evening, you gather the crew. You speak softly. Thank them. You tell them, we leave something behind in every wave we cross. That's how legends are built, not in marble, but in memory. They don't cry. Sailors rarely do. But no one sleeps well that night. You sail on, as the winds allow, as far as you can.
You don't see the sunrise anymore, not with your own eyes. The morning arrives like a soft hum, more felt than seen. Your body stays in bed now, too heavy, too brittle to fight gravity. Your thoughts come in waves, slow and curling, like the tide lapping against the hull. Outside, the crew moves gently. Even the rowdiest sailors speak in hushes now. They know. You're still alive, but you're drifting. Between breaths, between dreams, between what was and what might still be remembered. The ship is in the Arabian Sea now, hugging the coast toward Hormuz and beyond. They say you've almost reached the furthest western point of your final voyage, but you're far more focused on a different kind of journey. Some days you're lucid enough to smile, to crack a dry joke about how a eunuch turned admiral is outlasting half the fleet's sails. Other days, you're lost in the haze, murmuring directions to ports that haven't existed in centuries, or speaking to people long gone. One evening, you whisper to your steward, "Tell the stars they still owe me a dance." He nods solemnly, like it's the most natural request in the world. You stop eating, then drinking. It's not a decision, it just feels unnecessary now. The physician insists on broths, on tinctures, on boiled roots soaked in wine. You accept them with a nod, then forget them the moment they pass your lips. You're not in pain. You're not afraid. You're simply done. Somewhere off the coast of Oman, your breath becomes shallow. You're aware, barely,
Just enough to know this is it. Your last words are not famous, not grand. You simply whisper, "Lower the anchor." Whether you mean it literally or metaphorically, no one's quite sure. But the first mate does it anyway, slowly, with the reverence of a monk laying down a holy text. That night, the stars bloom brighter than anyone can remember. The crew gathers silently. Lanterns are lit, flags are lowered. A single bell chimes 3 times, echoing into the still dark sea. The official report will say that Zheng He died at sea in 1433, likely near Calicut or Hormuz. Historians still argue the exact location. Some say it was closer to India. Others say he was buried at sea, per his wishes, beneath a sky full of constellations. A few believe his body was embalmed and returned quietly to Nanjing. What isn't debated, however, is the impact. You were the last of your kind. After your death, the tides shifted fast. Back in China, the political winds had already turned. The new emperor, more Confucian, more conservative, more focused inward, had little appetite for overseas adventures. The massive shipyards of Longjiang were ordered to halt production. Maritime logs were boxed and sealed. Nautical charts, those brilliant world-spanning artworks, were burned or locked away. Trade routes collapsed. Tribute missions dissolved. The treasure ships were scrapped. Some became barges for mundane transport. Others were left to rot until only barnacled ribs remained. Within decades, the memory of you began to fade from official records. Your voyages, once triumphs, were reframed as excesses. Your name became little more than a whisper in tea shops and coastal villages. Even your grave, if it exists, is modest, anonymous. And yet, you are not forgotten. In Malacca, an old sailor hangs a charm from his boat and mutters your name before setting sail. In Sri Lanka, a crumbling stone inscription still bears the tale of a foreign admiral who spoke Sanskrit and left gold. In Kenya, descendants of Chinese African families claimed their great-great-grandmother was saved by a doctor from a strange square-sailed ship. In Nanjing, a small shrine quietly honors you. People leave offerings of incense, tea, and tiny carved ships. Sometimes a child asks, "Who was he?" And the answer always begins the same way. He went farther than anyone else. Modern historians still marvel at your scale. You led voyages larger than anything Europe would attempt for another century. Your ships were marvels of engineering. Your diplomacy oddly gentle for an era so full of conquest. And yet, your story was almost erased. Quirky side note, there's a strange theory floating around, not widely accepted but persistent, that one of your fleets might have reached the Americas. Some claim a storm blew a few ships across the Pacific, landing somewhere on the Mexican coast, long before Columbus. The evidence? Sketchy. A carved giraffe, a folk tale, some porcelain fragments. But it makes for a good campfire story. Regardless of that truth, your confirmed impact remains massive. You led voyages built soft power without invasion. You gave gifts rather than demanded tribute. You brought elephants and zebras to emperors who had never seen such wonders. You returned with maps, languages, musical instruments, and legends. You proved that empire didn't always have to mean conquest, that exploration could be awe, not fire. Still, there's a sadness in your silence. The Ming dynasty shrank away from the world you opened. Within a century, Europe would surge ahead. Portuguese caravels, Spanish galleons, British East Indiamen, carving up seas you once ruled without spilling blood. It's ironic. you were perhaps the most powerful admiral of your age. And yet, the waves chose to forget your name for a time. But tonight, here in this story, you rise again. You stride the deck of your treasure ship, stars wheeling overhead, wind in your sleeves, and the roar of foreign shores calling your name.
Your name isn't shouted in the halls of the Forbidden City anymore. The emperors have changed, and with them, the priorities of the dynasty. But here you are, still sailing, in whispers, in wind, in half-remembered stories passed down from fisherfolk and harbor clerks across the Indian Ocean. The fleet begins to shrink even before your body is cold. The new officials in Beijing issue a quiet but clear directive. No more grand naval expeditions. No more treasure ships. No more tossing silk and porcelain to distant rulers in exchange for exotic animals and vague promises of tribute. It's expensive, unorthodox, and, to the new court, unnecessary. The giant dry docks that once echoed with the ring of hammers and the creak of cedar beams now sit empty, weeds crawling up their sides. The artisans who once built ships taller than city gates are reassigned, or worse, forgotten. Your crew is dispersed. Some become minor officials, others retire along the coast, their sea legs aching for the decks they'll never walk again. A few go rogue, sailing south, trading spices, living as pirates or mercenaries in forgotten corners of the world. And the ships themselves? What a tragedy. These marvels of engineering, these behemoths of the ocean with 9 masts and 5 decks, are left to decay. Some are dismantled and repurposed. A few are turned into floating warehouses. One legend claims that a broken treasure ship became the foundation of a dockside village near the Yangtze. Kids climbed its skeletal ribs like a playground, unaware they were scaling the bones of history. Historians still argue why this all ended so suddenly. Was it political paranoia? A fear of rising foreign powers? Pressure from conservative scholars who thought the voyages were immoral? Or maybe, just maybe, it was the loss of you, the only man who could have kept the ocean in check. And without you, the sea became a threat again, mysterious, untamed, better left alone. The strange part? China, despite pulling back, still held immense power. It wasn't like the country became weak, it just stopped looking outward. The empire turned its gaze inward, focusing on borders, bureaucracy, and Confucian ideals. The great fire of exploration dimmed to a flickering candle. Meanwhile, far across the globe, tiny European kingdoms began their rise. First the Portuguese, hugging the African coast. Then the Spanish, boldly slicing across the Atlantic. The British, the Dutch, they'd all follow. Smaller ships, but bigger ambitions. None of them had vessels as advanced as yours. None had maps as accurate. None had the diplomatic grace to deliver silks and poetry instead of cannonballs and musket fire. But they had something else, a hunger. The kind of desperate hunger that comes from a land short on spices, silver, and status. And with that hunger, they crossed oceans you'd already charted and claimed discoveries you'd quietly made. Some fringe thinkers even joke that if you had continued your voyages, the age of colonialism might have looked very different. That maybe there'd be Chinatowns in Lisbon or pagodas in Peru. But instead, you vanished, and history took a left turn. Still, your ghost lingers. In the wreckage of a broken mast found off the coast of Java, in the story of a giraffe sketched into the margin of a Persian travel diary, in a coin stamped with the Ming seal found buried beneath a Kenyan fishing village, and most powerfully, in the silence between the waves, where sometimes, if the night is still enough, it sounds like the creak of a ship turning eastward, heading home. As for the treasure ships, well, they became legends. Books would one day call them the Dragon's Fleet, palaces on water, floating cities. People would doubt they ever existed. How could ships that big have ever sailed when even 17th century galleons seemed puny in comparison? But they did exist. They sailed with you at the helm.
They crossed storm-choked seas, carried diplomats and dancers, astronomers and horses, gold and gospel. And they returned 7 times. Until you didn't. Even now, scholars debate your rank, your religion, your motives. Were you a devout Muslim following the call of Mecca? A loyal servant executing imperial orders? A closet explorer, driven by the same spark that lit the hearts of future navigators like Magellan and Cook? The answer is yes, to all of it. You were complicated, brilliant, terrifying to your enemies, and soothing to your allies. You were a eunuch who commanded more men than most kings, a sailor who carried no sword but held the world in his grasp. And your story matters, not because it ended in fireworks, but because it didn't. It faded, quietly. Which, if we're honest, is how most real legends pass. And now you float gently through the last remnants of this story, not as an admiral, not even as a memory, but as a presence, drifting, soft, like the hush of sails collapsing into the wind at day's end. The ocean, once roaring with command and ambition, now laps calmly against its own history. You can almost hear it, the faint splash of water against the hull of a ship that no longer exists, the muted hum of a crew settling into hammocks, voices low, laughter fading into the night. There's no need to rush now, no urgent tides or imperial scrolls demanding your attention, just the gentle rocking, the scent of salt and wood and distant shores, the way the stars used to spin above your mast like lanterns waiting to be plucked from the heavens. Even the questions fade. What you did, what it meant, what might have happened if you'd sailed one more time, it doesn't matter now. What matters is this quiet, this stillness, the soft breathing of time as it exhales and forgets. So let yourself drift. Let your thoughts float like lanterns in the dark, bobbing gently toward the horizon. Nothing will chase you here. No storm, no emperor, no unfinished voyage. Only rest. Only calm. Only the endless sea rocking you gently toward sleep. Toward dreams of cinnamon-scented ports and gilded prows and laughter echoing down a deck at twilight. You've arrived. At last. Sweet dreams.